I think it's a handful of things that play into each other. Everything from industrialization, population, to resourcing and financing.
Well, of course, it fits into a larger pattern that depends on what section of any kind of urban area or even a rural area that you live. But let's just take a typical American city. Um, the sections of the city where people don't have access to a bank, public transit, on have already got even more basic, fundamental problems of access and proximity, and you could just add this on top of it. Matter of fact, even thinking in terms of things like organic and things like that. I mean, that's also something that's usually too expensive for people that live in those sections of cities.
Those big grocery stores have to get certain margins. And when they don't, they leave, and then we have this big empty store that's really not serving the community.
Just really, to me, it's like a cultural thing. Or if other areas, maybe because there's not the resources for employment, so you'll have a highly homeless area where people have inability to get to food.
Growing up in a small town of Essex, Connecticut, I never thought about the access to food. It never crossed my mind that if I really needed to do so, I could walk the 6 minutes to get fresh produce. Even though my parents had always had a car and I would always have a means of transportation if need be, there would never be an issue of me getting food due to the close proximity of the grocery store. It was a shock to me to hear that there are actually things called food deserts. Food deserts are deprived areas of cities with poor access to retail provisions of healthy, nutritional foods that are essential to a diet. The U.S. Department of Agriculture defines a food desert as a census tract in which 33% of the population, or 500 people, whichever is less, live more than a mile away from a grocery store in an urban area, or more than 120 miles away in a rural area. An estimated 23.5 million people live in such areas. These areas are noticeably present in the region of Hillsborough County. I wanted to ask my peers, as well as professors and experts, how they define these places of food insecurity.
And a food desert is something that is a term that I don't like to use because deserts are a naturally occurring thing in nature. You know, things die, they happen. It may take millions of years, but they're naturally occurring. And when you talk about a food desert, those aren't so natural. Those happen because of policies that were put in place, a community being disinvested in, and people pulling out because there is not enough margin in a community to build profit, or the profit that and usually an outside source wants to sustain in a community.
So what a food desert is say if somebody lived in a food desert, that means that they don't have access to food within a reasonable amount of distance from their home, whatever their transportation situation is. But if they can't easily access, say, a grocery store, or some quality food within a convenient amount of time or distance, then they would be considered to live in a food desert. And then there's also something called a food swamp, which